what do you wish faculty knew about how to help you succeed?
Sometimes it takes more than that one time in the class to really grasp the concept.
So I think when they allowed us to do like peer things during class, it was really helpful because we had the guidance of them if we were stuck or I don't know, it just allowed me to engage more and feel more comfortable asking questions and knowing that everyone else is also on the same page as me is also helpful.
So you know you're not alone. So when you say not in the best in the classroom, what are some things that maybe didn't kind of vibe with you?
Just they didn't really let us do our own examples.
Okay.
We didn't get to actually work through the problem on our own. We just had to watch the slides.
I like to, help my peers out whenever they do ask me because, if you understand a subject, then you're able to teach it to somebody else. So, I believe that, so that's how I know I'm learning.
I think they kind of stop, they take a beat, they realize, hey, this is brand new for these guys. This is hardcore stuff that we're learning. So hey, just taking the time to sit back and be like, where are you guys at? How are we feeling? Are we good to move forward? Should we focus a little more on this? Just kind of reading the room, I guess is the best way to put it.
So the biggest way that I know I've learned something is that when the next year and the professor's like, oh yeah, you learned this, that I can recall it.
Wow, it's interesting to hear that students care about their progress in the classroom.
So Olivia, thank you so much for being here. Do you mind introducing yourself and then kind of what resonated with you about the videos?
Yeah, I'm Olivia Burnshead. I'm an assistant teaching professor here at ASU. I teach biomedical engineering, teach a number of different classes from students kind of first year up until their third year. And a lot of that really resonates with me. There are so many different aspects as an instructor that we have to think about in our course design of how to help students succeed, because sometimes they are just ticking the boxes and trying to get the grade that they need, but a lot of times they chose this major because they care about the course content. So figuring out ways to meet them where they're at are really important.
So could you describe kind of your teaching experience? How long have you been in this, field, but also your journey in terms of being an instructor and how it's progressed for you?
Yeah, so I was an undergrad in biomedical engineering. I thought I wanted to go to medical school. Started working in the lab at the same time to help me with medical school applications, but then I found out I really enjoyed the lab. Then in grad school, we were required to do some teaching experiences, and I did that, and I actually loved it, and I thought, actually, maybe I want to teach this. This is so interesting and important. And so then I became a grad TA and then started teaching. And then after that, about a little over 5 years ago, I became a teaching professor here. So I've been doing this for a little over 5 years now and focusing a lot on our BME curriculum. And we've made a number of different changes, especially as we've shifted to online modalities and then trying to figure out how can we use the content that we develop for online for our in-person courses. So really trying to think of different ways to stay relevant and meet our students where they are.
So thinking about specifically assessment, right, as things have been changing over the course of years, different types of students, you're changing content, different types of modalities. So when you look at assessment, how has that kind of changed in the way that you approach it in your class? And then thinking about, specifically using polling, because we got to see your class. So kind of share that with us.
Right. So whenever I was an undergrad and even whenever I started as an instructor, a lot of our class format was traditional lectures and then some homework problem sets and then a quiz or an exam in class. But most of the time in class was with traditional lectures, we might work on an example problem or two, but not a lot of that. And then I think we've taken kind of the exact opposite approach before and done fully flipped classes where we've recorded everything. And then we had some assessments in class that we were kind of spending the whole time in class. But then through that process, I actually found out that not all the students are actually understanding the lecture content, and I'm sometimes missing that if we're spending all time working on the in-class activities. So now I feel like I'm on version 3.0 of Olivia's teaching, and so now I do kind of a mixed hybrid format. So I do what I call a semi-flip format where we kind of have students mostly watch course content before they come to class, and then in class, we definitely do class activities and some hands-on kind of stuff, and then do some types of assessment as we go to figure out did they actually understand the course content that was flipped that they watched ahead of time. And then we have some activities to assess that a little bit and delve deeper into the topic. And then I'll do some lecturing in class too if it's a lecture style class.
You mentioned something too about that you found out from students that they didn't like the flipped. You want to talk about kind of how did you get that information?
Yeah, so through polling software. Actually, I'm a big fan of polling the class, and I can ask students verbally, but what I find, especially in large classes, I'm often teaching to 60 to 100 students. Right. So it's easier for me to get a better understanding of where students are if I actually poll them, and then I can see, well, 60% of you think this and 30% of you think this. Because students learn in different ways, right? We have different learning approaches that work for different students. So being able to see kind of what they think. So I actually, in the beginning of my class, I was sick and my whole family was sick and I couldn't come to class one day. So I, instead of doing the semi-flipped format, I did fully flipped that day, right? And then the next class period, I asked students like, okay, what do you actually prefer? Because our first day we did kind of traditional lecture. Right. Our next day we did semi-flipped. And then the third one was fully flipped. So you've had this class in 3 different formats. How do you think you learned this content best? And that's really helpful for me. They've seen it in this very specific area of biomaterials. And then I found out, okay, 66% of the students preferred to have this semi-flipped hybrid format. And then about 20% thought that they would prefer traditional lecture style. They just learn better in person. They just don't like videos, right? And then the other were like somewhere in between the two and kind of wanted fully flipped maybe. So it's really interesting to kind of like see where they are. And I try to survey them at the beginning of class for stuff like this and at the very end of class. What do you think now? And so that's also really interesting. I found that the students who, my final is optional, so they replace their lowest exam grade if they want. And now the students who didn't do as well in the class, most of them were the ones that did say they didn't prefer this semi-flip format. They preferred the traditional lecture style. And so it's like I didn't give them what they asked for in the beginning and what they wanted, and they kind of knew themselves. Right. At this point, they're third years. They know what their like best learning modalities were, and so that's really interesting for me to think of. Okay, I need to meet these students differently next semester in my next iteration. How am I going to improve the class and the experience for those students?
Yeah, it sounds like that. You know, with any form or modality that you're doing, that it also relies upon the student's abilities, right? So we kind of mentioned like student work habits and like, you know, the students in the video too, they're like, there's things that they want, there's things that they need to learn how to do. And, you know, we'll kind of get into that a little bit later on. But like how do you prep these students to be able to kind of handle the switching formats in 3 different is there things that you just naturally assume that they have, or something that you might have to like, you know, prep them for, like, to be able to do those things?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the things that we've really used to our advantage with these kind of online formats is like we've taken some of that content and had modules that we now build into our in-person classes too of prerequisite content, right? You should know differential equations, or you should know basic coding in Python. And if you don't, here's a little refresher module before you come to class, right? So that it kind of helps them. They can assess it. They don't have to do it, but if they think that they need it, then they can take this as they need. So I think that's one of the things that's been really helpful with kind of figuring out what students have and what they need, and then them being able to kind of self-direct their path as they're going into classes.
I think assessment, sometimes we see a lot of courses that are very content heavy focused, right? And you spoke about your experiences as very lecture focused. And so it's not necessarily intuitive to build in these checks of assessment. And I will say you're being very modest about about the amount of assessment that occurs in your course. Because, you know, you have the asynchronous review using polling software. Then you're doing assessment with the content that they learn right there. And then you're doing assessment, again, they're doing problem solving and assessment during that whole piece. And then they've got a unit quiz.
So online unit assessments where they can have open book, open notes, so they're getting some time to like think about the process and then do it themselves. So, and then a unit exam at the end that's like the traditional exam in person. So definitely have lots of different options for assessing students, but I think it's good to kind of have checks for me to know where they're at, and for them to see like, oh wow, I thought I understood this content, but I made a 30%, right? So for the pre-class activities, whenever they're getting to do it, they can repeat it as many times as they need to get the perfect skills, right? That's another mastery-based learning option. And then for the in-class, they're getting the grade that they get for that, but it also is like, I dropped their lowest 3, it's not a huge deal. So they're getting to kind of see, okay, I really didn't understand this lecture, I need to go back over that content. And I get to see it in person, real life, real time, and I can say, say like, ooh, most of you missed this. We obviously need to talk about this. Even though I thought it was explained well, right? If I'm seeing that less than 80% are understanding something, then I know I need to like delve deeper.
Right, and that comes specifically from polling, right? The software, right? Yes. Immediately, because you're real-time assessing.
Yeah, it's really hard in large classes, right, to be able to do a homework assignment and then get it graded really quickly, right? Unless you're doing like only scoring, no partial credits, only get it if they score the perfect answer, right? And that's just really hard to do. Yeah. And especially in engineering classes where we want them to get the correct answer in the end, but we want to teach them about the engineering problem solving method and how they're thinking about solving problems. Exactly. So a lot of times we have to kind of hold their hand at first and really like walk them through, these are the steps of how you solve a problem and how you think about a problem. And then we kind of ask them the more open-ended problem. And sometimes we jump ahead too quickly, right? If I'm in a third year class, I'm like, they've already learned that step.
They should know this.
They should know this. And I'll ask them, and I've learned that myself, is I'll sometimes ask them an open-ended question. I'll expect them to get to the answer, and they have no idea what I'm asking for a lot of times, and they're just kind of lost in the weeds. Yeah. And so then I'll have to, reassess. I got to change this problem. I need to rewrite it. I need to write kind of step by step. How do they get there? And then the next time I ask them about it, I can have it be a lot more open-ended.
Yeah. So, Olivia, when I had the pleasure of going into your class and observing, there were so many types of assessment occurring. Again, the pre-work assessment, you had the in-class assessment, you had student discussions, there was paper, there was candy for assessments. So how does you think all those multiple types of assessment in one 75-minute class, how do you think that benefits students?
Yeah, so if we have the assessment kind of before they come to class, they get an understanding of like, do I understand the course content that I need to be able to delve deeper into this topic? So them being able to see like, yes, I got the right answer on my play pause it questions with the video is helpful. It helps me kind of assess like, did they actually watch it or not? I can look at like my general class and see like, oh, everybody's doing it or everybody's not, or what percentage. So it helps me, it helps them. And then whenever they come to class and I do what I call their knowledge checks at the very beginning, it's where they aren't allowed to phone a friend. They just have to think about what they've learned. And this allows me to like have them think critically about the content that they've learned, but also it allows them to think like, ooh, I really didn't understand that concept, even though I got the questions right after I had been presented it, but I didn't like maybe sit with it or live with it or think about it critically enough on my own to be able to actually use it later, right? Because a lot of times they're watching this like 2 days beforehand or
on
whatever.
Double speed.
Right, yes, exactly. So really being able to them to know themselves, like I really need to think about this more before I am ready for an exam, that type of thing. And then whenever they're working with their peer groups, right, whenever we're actually having kind of introducing deeper content on that same area, then they're able to like actually apply what they've learned. And what they can also see is like, I am one of the people that understands enough where I'm willing to share what I've learned. Or if they aren't, then they're like, they're able to learn from their peers. And so they're still learning. And their peers who do understand it, we understand it better whenever we try to explain it to others. Right? So having that option of like, I know and understand it well enough that I'm going to share, or I don't understand it well enough. And hopefully my peer is going to introduce it in a new or different way than the instructor. So sometimes hearing something just differently or in layman's terms is going to help them. So they're getting to experience it lots of different ways. And then definitely like having something where they're putting pen to paper and then getting to actually try it themselves has been like that's something I've started doing this semester, and I'm definitely going to try to do more. It feels like I'm going back in time a little bit, but at the same time I think it's like it's really relevant. And what I've found like from my student surveys at the end of the class is like, how can I improve this? And they're like, we want more homework, we want more optional problem sets so that they feel more prepared in the end. So yeah, I think it helps the students kind of see what they know and understand, and also get some real world experience. Because a lot of times we're talking about a concept and a problem, but they don't really like get to apply it. But whenever we have some type of physical example and we're going through that, then they're actually seeing like how it applies in the real world. And if they want to be a biomedical engineer, it helps them see like, I really like these types of problems, or I really don't like these types of problems, right? So they learn earlier on.
Nice.
We also want to flip it and see from the faculty perspective, because a lot of people who are the millions of people that are listening to this podcast, and all the new faculty, veteran faculty, it's a lot of ask to be able to go through a lot of these different types of formative assessments, to have them planned out, to use that data that's on there. So what could you say almost to kind of convince them of people who are not using a lot of formative assessments during class?
Yeah.
Like, how does that impact you as an instructor literally, like, what's the benefit of doing this as an instructor?
Yeah, so I will say there is definitely a time to put in the effort in the beginning, right? There's no question about that. Making the changes themselves do take time, effort, and energy. And so unless you have like a course buyout or something where you are trying to redesign a whole class, it is a lot. It's probably too much for anybody to do for an entire class. But making those small iterative changes is something that has a big impact on the course in the end. The other thing I'd say that's been hugely helpful that our department, Dave Brofman, has done is set up working groups. So everybody who's teaching this class is in a working group together. And we meet at least once a semester to talk about, this is the stuff that went well, this is the stuff that didn't go so well, these are the changes that I think you should make in the next iteration of this class. Because it helps if I'm teaching the same class every semester, then I can change. But what about the people who are also teaching it and we're kind of learning separately? This brings us all together. We can talk about those changes. And that's also one way where we can say, like, hey, you're really good at creating slides. You create new slides and I'll create more written example problems, right? So then you're kind of like dividing and tackling that content together. The other thing, like on the faculty side, is once you go through and you create this content, for me, whenever I'm going back through, my normal process for going over slides would be that I read through the lectures, slides themselves, I go back over the textbook itself, and then I go back over the lecture slides again and I edit them again. And it usually takes a lot of time. Even though I've taught this class, I've taught biomaterials for the last 5 years. My PhD is in biomaterials area. But it still takes time for me to go back through. This semester, that side of the prep has been a lot faster because I literally am going through, I'm watching the videos. I'm watching videos and being like, actually, I think they're going to have trouble with this concept. I'm going to try to delve deeper into this whenever we get into class. And so it's taken less time for me because then even the lecture content that I'm presenting, we also have already recorded for online. It might not be what I'm using for my in-person students, but I'm reviewing it myself. So it's saving me time for like future iterations of the class and for other instructors. So, and it also helps, like, this is a class where I've recorded some of the content and then one of my peers has recorded some of the content. So we're actually seeing how each other does things and then like learning from each other. So over time, I can easily see how it saves us time, effort, and energy. Definitely in the moment, it's tough to do that first semester, but totally worth it in the end.
And you mentioned this before, kind of these small changes. Is there any other specific tips you would give to faculty who are still like, I'm not sure how where do I start adding informative assessment during class? So what advice or tips would you give?
So like the easiest change is to add in some iClicker, right? Okay. So like you can do iClicker assessments and there's some very short tutorial videos. It can take you less than 2 hours to kind of learn how to add iClickers to your PowerPoint slides and then get information immediately from your students, right? So that's kind of the quickest, easiest. Just put in some lecture slides in your normal lectures and then see, do they understand this content? And if not, go back over it. Even if it's the exact same slides, at least you know you need to delve deeper into that. You can write on the board, whatever it is. And then the next level for that, for me, would be flipping some of the content. So what's really easy and what students really like is whenever I reference like YouTube videos on like the vascular system or immune cells, right? Seeing how do macrophages work, right? So having videos where it's like really good examples, because remember, students learn in different ways. So if I have somebody that's audio visual versus kinesthetic, if I have different formats, then I can just share content that's already out there. So a lot of my classes, the pre-class activity is to watch some YouTube video that I didn't even create, but it's something that's going to be relevant for the class, right? Maybe it's something that's like, it's a pre-class activity, but it's going to help us delve deeper into the class in general later on. So that's another like easy thing to add in, right? So your first semester, you might just add iClickers. Your next semester, you might add pre-class activities and then adding a couple of questions on those activities in the iClicker. So it's just a knowledge check. That's really simple changes. Those are pretty easy to make. Then your next layer, you might add your module assessments on Canvas. That takes more time and effort to build your question bank. But I think if you do it kind of in stepwise fashion, starting with the iClicker, that's like the low-hanging fruit, and then kind of building on from that. And then whenever you're thinking about saving you time, effort, and energy, especially if you have graders or you're going to be sharing content, then for me, like Gradescope or something like that to make grading a lot faster is worthwhile.
And I think we've heard in student interviews, too, about a lot of students going directly to YouTube for support. And so when you added, and I remember you had videos showing what was going on, and I have no background in BME, and I was like, oh, this makes sense. And so just thinking about how one little video
Yes.
Right? 2 minutes, 3 minutes clip can help people learn.
Definitely.
And I'm like, I wish I would have known about BME when I was younger.
Yes. Yeah. And there's so many different tools online now with AI and everything too, of figuring out how we can use these and how the students can use them in their favor. Right? Sure. Make a podcast of the content that you need to learn and listen to the podcast before. Right? It's having different ways that they can know and understand that is really helpful.
Yeah.
Not to make a bad pun, but if you're finding the pulse of these students and their mastery, it seems to me like for an instructor, it's almost kind of like the hidden time spent, right? In terms of like if you go through material and then you're not sure how the students are doing, right? And then come assessment time, they're like, I don't know what's going on. They show up to office hours and you're spending even more time kind of dealing with putting out the fires and answering the questions. You're like, I went over this. Like, why am I going over this again? That these formative assessments would be something where you're finding that pulse really more effectively earlier on. For sure. And then being able to kind of target your lecture time to be not just I'm giving you knowledge, but I'm trying to help you with the knowledge that you don't have, right? I don't have those things on there. And so it's almost like good habits for you as an instructor to, you could see almost like the struggle for some instructors, like, what? Like I have to take a pulse every 10 minutes during this lecture? Like that doesn't seem... But it also seems very much like if you do that, then you are kind of hopefully getting a better sense of like, did I teach that correctly?
Yeah.
Did they not get it? I need to give another example like that. And so how, for you, in 5 years now, plus being, coming through like literally kind of like being a student into an instructor, how well do you know the pulse of the students? Not, not to be like... evaluative, but for an instructor who cannot find that pulse, like how long does it take for them to kind of like get into these instructor habits that will help?
So I'd say like traditionally if I was analyzing it with a homework and then having to go home and grade it or wait for a grader to grade it, I wouldn't really know about that problem set until like the week later, right? That would be pretty typical, at least for large classes or larger assessments. So then it is kind of late, right? A lot of times we don't have a homework due until we're about to have an exam. And then I'm like, oh no, everybody missed this on the homework. But I posted the key, so they should be able to read the key and understand. But that really doesn't give us enough time to really like sit in the problem and learn together. And so doing these like individual, shorter, definitely lower hanging fruit, but like a lot easier for us to check. Are you still with me? Are you still paying attention? And it also helps students that would maybe normally be doing kind of other stuff on the side or not paying attention. They know they're getting assessed on this. So they have a reason to kind of pay attention then, as opposed to just saying like, I'll study for this before the exam, and then they'll wait. And then they'll get overwhelmed with the amount of content that they have, right? So it's great for them in that sense of being able to like do and assess that. And then as an instructor, how much easier is it for us whenever we have students that have like perfect scores for stuff? We're like, that's so much easier to grade, especially for like free response stuff where we're like, they understand this, versus whenever they don't, and then you're trying to like write an entire paragraph about what the answer should have been, or you're just posting the key and then you're hoping that they read the key and understand, right? So it's one of those like it helps everybody if we have these kind of individual small checks and then do some of this mastery-based learning as we go.
When I think the key word here is learning, so many, and for lots of reasons, the system, it's sometimes broken in terms of, it's about the grade. Some students are like, I want the grade, I want the score, I want the top place, and then I want to move on. But all of this assessment that you're doing it's promoting learning, it's encouraging critical thinking and problem solving, and it's benefiting them, even if there's a lot of resistance. So.
And I still have students that say like this course covers too much content, and like tell us what we really need to know for the exam to make an A. And like I don't want to tell you what's gonna. I don't want to give you a practice exam that's gonna be exactly like your exam, right? I want you to have to think critically about the information, and that's also usually on my exams. I usually have some extra credit opportunities, or it'll be out of 150 points and I'm going to grade you out of 130 or something like that, where it's okay. As long as you understand most of the content and you're able to kind of master this, you don't have to have a perfect score to still get a perfect score, right? Because I want to recognize that there are answers, and if I was taking it, it's been 5 years, I might have missed one, right? And then I had to think about it critically and then go back through. So I think having that where it's like they know that it's not about you getting the A on the exam. It's about you learning through this process. And so reminding them that that's the case as well. We're always going to have students that just want to get the A. They don't really care about it. And that's okay too.
Right.
I recognize that, but I think if we can make it interactive and them see like the real world examples for these, it definitely helps.
Yeah, for everyone. It's for everyone.
Yeah. Yes, for everyone.
Do you feel like there's different styles of formative assessments that work well? Maybe like introductory classes versus upper level?
Yes. Yeah. So my format changes a lot based on the type of content that I'm teaching. Okay. So for example, my ethics class, right? My pre-class activities would be like they are watching some video, and maybe it's about the Tuskegee study, right? Like it's going to be like some video, it's a recap of like what happened, or they're watching a little clip for the No Mas Bebes, like a documentary. So they're learning a little bit, and it's something that's like very tangible, very real, right? And I'm still doing a little bit of a pre-class assessment and that like kind of knowledge check in the beginning. But what we spend a lot of time on in class is different, right? I want them to apply what they've learned and in how we talk about these things, and then it's a very different format in my ethics class versus my biomaterials class versus my BME 200, which is our conservation principles class, which has a lot of coding, right? So like I approach all of these very differently. The coding class is one where there is also a pre-class activity, but it's a how do we approach this problem? How would you write it out by hand? And then in person, we're working on coding the problem and coding the solution itself. So it's an example problem that's similar to what was introduced, but now we're really physically there coding. Yeah. Because if students are trying to debug on their own at home, they can spend hours and hours and miss the period, right? Like it's like, what is the line here? But if we have this where we're in class together and they're like, hey, I'm getting some error in my code, it's easier for us to like say like, hey, partner up with a friend or chat with one of the TAs, and then us come over and be like, oh, yep, you missed a period there in your code. Now everything works. So I totally changed the format and the assessments based on the class, but I will say some of these are like, I use iClicker for pretty much all of my classes now because it's just so easy to do. Once you actually learn it and learn how it can be used, then it's like, okay, I'm going to take these and I'm going to use it for everything. And then others where I'm like, it doesn't work for this format, and that's totally okay too. But definitely finding ways that I can assess multiple steps, because like for that class, it's hard for me to grade all of those as I go individually, right? So that's one where I try to get a little bit of a sense, but then I post the key afterwards. They submit it and I post the key, so they are hopefully checking it themselves, right? So they're still going through that same process, but I don't give them a grade until later.
Okay. That's amazing. Okay, you're amazing.
Well, thank you for having me.